people that had been absolutely unequivocally loyal, who had propagandized on his behalf. But all of those people, they just stopped. Dramatically so, because anybody in the world of boxing knew that double life was over. And if they wanted to make a living out of boxing, they could not be coming out in support of Daniel Kinahan.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're listening to Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the sins of the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. I got the news very late on Friday night, that Tyson Fury was being basically banned from entering the United States. So a bit of a frenzy to get the story up, because I think we both knew how big a story this is. This is just way beyond crime reporting. This is a massive international story. A huge sports star, the heavyweight champion of the world, is not allowed to enter the US because of his links to Daniel Kinahan.
Yeah, literally got me out of my bed to help get it up online.
Soz.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible story, really. I mean, if you think traditionally the heavyweight champion boxer of the world is probably, it used to be regarded as the most famous sports person on the planet. You know, that Tyson Fury, who's become an iconic figure in boxing, certainly because of his victories, to not be allowed into the US. I mean, it's devastating for him. It is a massive, massive story. And I suppose more than anything, it just shows you the US officials, they just don't mess around.
He was actually very publicly in Liverpool that night, and there was a lot of, commentary, shall we say, or maybe a little bit of abuse from some of the fans coming into my Twitter. But I was very confident that he had indeed attempted, not quite to board a plane and been kind of like, strong-armed off it, but he certainly had booked a flight, and the flight was out of Manchester earlier in the day, and he had been informed that he wasn't going to be allowed to enter the US. So it seems a lot of boxers are attempting to buy flights just to test the waters.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Gardaí have came out publicly and said 600 people associated with Kinahan, some of them perfectly law-abiding people, but have associated with him through boxing, some of them not so law-abiding, to say the least. So, I mean, I remember when that figure came in, 600, and somebody in the newsroom saying to me, "Oh, can we get that list?" Mm-hmm. And while we'd love to get it, it's not like that.
It's not going to be handed out to journalists and for people to peruse.
No, or to anybody else.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the way it seems to work is you only find out. Doesn't matter if you're the world heavyweight champion with $1 million operation behind you. The only way to find out is to actually book a flight and try and get on. And that it just shows you how the Americans do things. I don't know even if there is a way to appeal that, or is it just that's the case, that is it. But I suppose anybody who's flown to the States from Ireland even will know, when you get to, well, at least as I remember, when you get to Shannon, that's where the immigration service.
You don't have to go to Shannon anymore. How long is this since you were in America?
Goodness been a while. But
you do pre-immigration here. I think we're the only country in the world, actually, that they'll do pre-immigration with. So we get through and we can just walk on. But I actually flew from the UK in the last couple of months to Phoenix, and you're stopped out there for your documents to be checked. Actually, it was very quick. I think Phoenix is one of the most efficient airports in the States, but it can be slow going into New York from the UK. But he never even set foot in the flight because, look, I suppose nobody wants a big, huge, media drama in an airport at the moment. Things are bad enough, aren't they?
Yeah.
So, they're obviously informing them beforehand. There's no point in you getting on this flight because you ain't getting off it. And
which is the same as what seems to have happened to Matthew Macklin. Matthew Macklin obviously was the co-founder of what ultimately became MTK with Daniel Kinahan. They haven't been associating, I think, in recent times. Matthew Macklin's gone on to become a very prominent commentator with Sky and others. But he was refused I think he didn't get out of the UK as well. He was stopped at that point. So,
and there's a few others that's been named in the UK media, not quite as high profile as the two of them. And look, it's probably happening to people on a daily basis, but we don't know who they are, and they aren't of any major relevance. But obviously, Tyson Fury is. You mentioned Matthew Macklin, which really brings us back, because I think anybody who's only paid attention to this Tyson Fury end of the story, or the boxing end of the story in recent times, probably since the US sanctions, doesn't really know exactly what those links are. So I thought we'll go back and we will just recall for ourselves exactly when Tyson Fury came into Daniel Kinahan's world and what was going on at that time, because it is very significant period of time, really, when he comes on the scene, and when Daniel Kinahan has very much been in the media. So we go back and we'll just briefly go over what happened. So Gary Hutch, a former friend of Daniel Kinahan's, a member of the extended Hutch family here in Dublin, is shot dead in the Costa del Sol in September of 2015. And the next major event that happens is the Regency Hotel attack, where David Byrne is shot dead. But that Regency Hotel attack causes huge chaos within the Kinahan organisation. Daniel Kinahan believes he was the target and that he escaped with his life. He returns to Spain, where he has a gym called MGM, set up initially in 2012 with Matthew Macklin. And initially when it was set up, I think we all felt it was a bit of a hobby.
Yeah.
We didn't realise exactly what it would become by then.
No, I think the first few fighters that were signed to the MGM were quite low profile, very local Dublin guys, really. Not necessarily going to challenge for world titles. I mean, really on another kind of level. You know, they were obviously working in that gym. There was no big promotion arm. There was, you know, it really looked like a hobby, I suppose.
Yeah. They were running those white collar events, which looked like, well, they were raising money for charities, but they were running these events out in Marbella, and Daniel Kinahan was fighting himself at them. Like, I mean, they were a small group, weren't they?
They were a small group, and they took a number of kind of amateur boxers in Dublin, and they were putting on small scale fights, some in the UK. Obviously, then eventually starting to come back to Dublin and a couple of fights in the local area. But it was really, you know, it was not, didn't look like they were going to try and take over the world. Of course, ambition is not something that Daniel Kinahan has ever lacked. And
No.
that it quickly, all of a sudden, they were going from local guys in Dublin to sort of bigger names.
Yeah, they went initially, I think, for a lot of the UK Olympians, Thomas Stoker and a couple of other names I don't recall just at the moment. But this expansion seemed to occur very much so between about 2013 and 15. And by 2015, they were putting on shows in the Three Arena.
They were putting on shows in the Tree Arena, and they were also doing them in across the UK in places like Liverpool and some in Scotland and places like that. They also signed up Billy Joe Saunders. Billy Joe Saunders will become a world champion. He became one of their first really, really big signings, where they were going for these guys that just, it was very hard to see them. You know, they were some of the Irish fighters were well known and all that, but Billy Joe Saunders was the first maybe guy that was going to be an international recognised boxing superstar.
And he, of course, is a very significant figure in the Tyson Fury story. So by the time Kinahan returns to Spain initially after the Regency Hotel incident, he's gone back, and MGM is massive. I think they have signed at this point about 100 boxers. It is a properly functioning promotions company, gym. They do have at this point their merch. They have a big name for themselves in the boxing scene, and they're kind of threatening really to kind of engulf a lot of the other promoters that are out there, that they seem to be kind of outbidding them for fighters, and they're offering a certain, what I would call a nirvana out in Marbella in Spain, Puerto Banús, where they're based. These boxers who boxers seem to be very badly treated from the way I can see it. And these boxers are all of a sudden offered a decent wage. Their families are being invited out to Spain. They're being given a villa to live in, and they have a nice swimming pool and a lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, it's
heaven.
Traditionally it's been hard for, like, I was like probably at the cream of any sport. There's huge money to be made, but really on the level below that, boxers have struggled to make a living, and people that have been putting on, developing fighters, they have to go through, make a lot of losses before that fighter can start generating money for them. I mean, and that's why boxers have been treated badly, because they get dumped if they don't make it. They struggle to make any money out of it, even though they're putting in all these fights. So MGM, as it was then, it was I suppose it was bizarre how quickly it went from being, really what looked like a
local club.
A local club, and all of a sudden it wasn't just that they were signing up fighters, they were opening branches across the UK, in other countries. It was an incredibly scaled up operation, and if you consider that there was nobody else doing that. There wasn't anybody else that was taking all boxing from root to stem, that were running those gyms. They were, it was incredible.
And it wasn't just boxers, of course, they were signing up as trainers, and they had all these sort of nutritionalists and everybody working for them. And, that was part of it as well, wasn't it? That the boxers were given a particular diet, particular food. They were eating out. I remember seeing some of the social magazines that were over in Marbella. And again, this is pre 2016, February 2016 Regency event. They were eating this particular diet, and they just seemed they were getting what, like, these international stars of other sports, I suppose, get. And
yeah, they were being, mid-level
treated
boxers.
Well, were they?
Yeah, well, their mid-level boxers were being treated like world champions, I suppose, and they were getting all those facilities, and it was an incredibly quick expansion. It happened a bit slowly, and then it just seemed to skyrocket. And they had all the arms of the company. They had, as you said, all the merchandise. You just seemed to hear that they were signing deals all the time. There was deals in South Africa. There's deals in Australia. Incredible stuff.
Now, all the while, the sporting world was looking on in awe, perhaps, but I suppose we were looking at it with the two trajectories. We were seeing this expansion of Daniel Kinahan, who of the club, the promotions company he had founded, and we were also seeing the trajectory of his other face, which was the organised crime world that he belonged to. And after 2016, he moves to Dubai, and the MGM gym was raided in the September of 2016, just after he moved to Dubai, and that was part of the arrest of James Quinn, a Dubliner who would later be tried and found guilty of the murder of Gary Hutch.
Yeah, James Quinn was somebody who'd grown up in the same flat complex as Daniel Kinahan in the Oliver Bond flat complex. He'd known Daniel's family all his life. He had meant to have been very close to Daniel's mother. He'd gone over, in theory, to work in the MGM gym, where he did do some training. But really, he was a classic muscle for an organised crime gang. He was really there to carry out the orders when violence was needed. That's just simply what he did. So he became Daniel's muscle, really, in Marbella.
I tell you what I was told he was: Daniel Kinahan's personal hitman.
Yeah.
That's what I was told he was. And that he was operating on a retainer out in Spain. He was paid. He'd sometimes drive for him. He'd do this, that, the other for him. But he was sitting waiting to be told what to do when it came to gun crime.
He had a yacht, ultimately, wasn't he? Arrested on a yacht worth, I think, 6, 7, I can't remember.
Stuffed with money as well. There was money everywhere. And he was, that's what he was. And he was out there, and every time he was on this retainer. And I was told whenever he did an extra job, he got up to 100 grand. Yeah. And that's what he was believed to have got for the murder of Gary Hutch.
So this is what you had then. Like you had this these two tracks where on one level, you know, you had these guys.
This expansion of what is a legitimate boxing business.
Yes.
But at the heart of it is a guy on this other trajectory of murder, drug dealing and weapons trafficking.
Yes. And you had people interspersed between both worlds, like James Quinn, you know, who are you know, working within the gym as legitimate trainers and also working in the other side of the business, let's put it that way. So it was a bizarre kind of thing where it was hidden in plain sight, I suppose.
Totally and utterly. And it was just an extraordinary thing to watch for so long. Interestingly, just as a little aside, one of the first boxers, you know, who, as you say, from the very beginning, they were almost amateur, maybe verging on professional, to be signed up was Ian Dixon.
Yeah.
And Ian Dixon, of course, is a cousin of Daniel Kinahan. He was signed up to the original MGM and became a coach or a trainer or whatever out there. And he, of course, is named during the US sanctions.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, you had a guy, Kevin Lynch, as well, who was working as a trainer in the gym, who'd also been arrested as part of Operation Shovel in 2010 and had been also described as kind of muscle for the Kinahan Organised Crime Group, who had a serious criminal history in Ireland. So it was a bizarre thing where these guys were appearing in photos all the time with boxers, legitimate boxers. Appearing in ringside. I mean, Daniel was, remember, if you look back, Daniel was appearing at ringside at the time with fighters. You know, they were all there in the front row otherwise, you know.
Such a short time away. Like, you know, when you think back, it's really only 5 years and he would have been wandering around at these fights. Okay, it's a little bit more, 6 years maybe. But he would have been wandering around at these fights around Dublin. We have so many photographs of him every time he was flying in and out. And now he is, you know, the hunted, you know, out there somewhere hiding out from the law.
Yeah, I mean, it was unusual. And it was because, like, you know, in Ireland, obviously, they had the reputation that they had, but, you know, they seemed to be able to put that aside. And, you know, the famous example, of course, is him doing an interview with one of the boxing magazines. Is probably his only ever on-the-record interview or whatever. And, you know, he wasn't asked about that. But, I mean, all of that stuff had been...
This is Daniel.
This is Daniel. Yeah. But all of that stuff had been, you know, if you Googled his name, the crime stuff was coming up before the boxing. But the boxing world didn't want to hear that. They didn't.
No, and they, as they repeated to us many a time, he'd no convictions.
Yeah. Exactly. But even then, beyond that, when gyms were being raided and, you know, people that were working there were being arrested for various crimes like James Quinn, you know, you know, whether people are convicted or not, I mean, and ultimately James Quinn was convicted, it didn't make any difference. People just didn't want to hear it.
It was Teflon, the boxing. It was MGM, Teflon. Wasn't it? I mean, it was another guy, a guy called Marvin Herbert, who is well known in the UK, and he had worked as an enforcer for years in drug gangs, and, you know, self-professed at that. I'm not just accusing of that. He has, you know, done interviews about it. But he was actually wanted for a significant case in the UK on which he never ended up standing trial. But he was brought back. He was actually arrested in the gym and dragged out. And everyone just ignored it.
Yeah.
Like there was nothing seemed to stick with it. I thought that September 2016 raid as part of the arrest for the Gary Hutch murder would have stuck. But I suppose internationally, who was Gary Hutch? You know, nobody cared, did they? They just didn't want to know.
No, and maybe it's the way things are broken down in journalism or whatever, that sports are sports and politics is politics and crime is crime. And, you know, the intersections maybe can slip through that way. But certainly you have to remember as well, like they had you know, they spent a lot of money promoting themselves away from that. Yeah. If you know what I mean. It didn't just happen by accident. I mean, they had people pumped out on YouTube channels, on other forums. I mean, a huge amount of money was spent on PR. I mean, we know that for a fact.
Yeah.
To try and counteract the effect of the Irish media. to veer it away from there. People were being put forward for various podcasts, stuff like that, boxers, all to move it away from that. They were promoting
it's very
themselves.
Successful. When you think about that, it's slightly scary because
is.
the voice of the Irish media saying actually this guy is a massive big criminal was just silenced.
Yeah, swamped out though. I mean, it was deliberate. It was a deliberate thing, and I mean, look, we've all, who knows exactly, but I mean, you're talking 6 figures more sums spent on PR effectively. So that's where it was.
And while the legal letters came flying into media organisations,
it was a double strategy. You know, and so I suppose Tyson Fury came in. When Tyson Fury came in, that was, I suppose, a way for them to move even further into the big time and away from, I think, the if you want, the whiff of criminality that had surrounded it. I think Tyson Fury was seen as a way to push them into the next level.
Exactly. And that was just in 2017. And just to set the scene for when he arrived, Michael Conlan had fought in New York. Now, I can't remember whether they'd signed him up at that stage, Michael Conlan, or he was going to be. His brother, Jamie Conlan, was certainly involved with them. One way or another, both Conlans ended up working with MTK, the brother Jamie as a vice president, actually, of MTK. And Conlan, I think, retained some independence, but was certainly linked to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Conlans are some of the people that have, both brothers have come out recently and said they've nothing more to do with MTK, and there's never been any suggestion, obviously, that they've involved in any criminality. But they were the type of people that certainly that MTK were looking for at the time.
I remember seeing MTK were just gagging to get at Mick Conlan because he was so massive, so big. And I often wondered, did the brother get the job in it and, so high up the rankings as an effort to get to Mick Conlan, who was the real star of boxing?
Yeah, he was the real, and in terms of, they had certainly at that point in the operation, they were intent on signing up every well-known Irish boxer, particularly some of the Olympians, people like that. They just hoovered them up relentlessly.
Anyone with a big name. Yeah. And at that point in 2017, Conlan was fighting in Madison Square Garden in Manhattan, like an amazing point of his career. Anyway, within months, in Marbella, in Puerto Banús, where the MGM gym still is, and possibly at this point is on its way to being turned into, or we're told towards the end of 2017 anyway, that the gym has sold. It's been changed hands, and that Sandra Vaughan has bought it outright, a tanning tycoon from Scotland, that Daniel Kinahan and Matthew Macklin have sold it and walked away from it. But that all comes around the same time that Tyson Fury shows up. Now, Tyson Fury isn't the guy that we see nowadays, the fit sporting champion. At that point, in around the May of 2017, he was obese. He was 6'9", 26 stone, and had a 2-year hiatus from boxing.
Yeah, I mean, Tyson Fury had become a world champion. Even before he became a world champion, he had spoken about battling with mental health issues. Very actually honest and quite moving when you hear him talk about his struggles. He'd become a world champion, and things had degenerated. He'd spoken about, drinking too heavily. He'd spoken about eating way too much. He'd obviously completely stepped away from boxing. He'd lost the run of himself by whatever way you want to describe it. Genuinely struggled. And I think what you have to remember is, looking back on it, people had written him off. Like, the guy was never, ever going to come back. He'd be featuring papers every now and again. I don't think anybody believed that he could recover from that. And I remember reading things and people saying, you can't put your body through that and come back and become a world champion. Like, nobody could ever doubt his talent. Like, he's the most, one of the most natural boxers, I think, in of all time, probably as a heavyweight, the most naturally gifted in terms of, his ability, despite his size, his ability to move and his boxing brain. But he was totally written off. I mean, I don't think did anybody.
The UK anti-doping agency had suspended him in June of 2016 to make matters worse because he'd failed a drug test. So he was really on the scrap heap.
He was really on the scrap heap. He'd said a lot of things about, he'd become a focus of very negative media attention for some of the quotes he'd given about gay people and things like that. I mean,
And women.
So he was written off but not by everybody.
No, and of course he was and remains a very close friend of Billy Joe Saunders, who was within the fold. And again, maybe you see how somebody, opens the door for them to somebody else, which is actually, that chasing of celebrity is used amongst certain cults as well. Weirdly, I'll just throw that in there. It is actually, they chase celebrity and they try and get introductions to people and all the rest of it. But anyway, this is with sport, so it's different. But they were out there. The first video that emerged of the two of them they were running through fountains of water in Marbella, and they had done this kind of like what would now be a TikTok type thing. They looked mental. I mean, Tyson Fury was absolutely huge. He was kind of, the body was coming after him after he was jumping through it. They started, him and Billy Joe Saunders, doing this kind of like double act nearly, and the videos were coming fast and furious nearly every day. Tyson Fury was driving around with Billy Joe. They were talking about his comeback, how he was going to, basically how he was going to fight really hard to get his career back on stream. They're talking about how good life was on the Costa. They were being chauffeur driven, the two of them. They were being fed, proper diets and all the rest of it. And I think at that point, Tyson Fury's big thing was to get back in the ring, to beat that doping ban, suspension, and to lose that weight, mainly.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. And I mean...
What weight is a heavyweight like?
Well, I suppose it can be whatever weight they want.
Well, not 26 stone.
No. I mean, if you look at him actually at the time, he really struggled to move, I mean, it was an incredible achievement in a way to come back from that point. But I think people thought even physically, like he was going to have to lose something like 10 stone. Like the physical pressure that would put on your system alone. People really didn't believe that you could come back. Mm-hmm. But obviously, Daniel Kinahan had played a big role in deciding that he was going to take a gamble on this guy.
Well, he was remaining in the background, and it was really only that Fury posted a selfie taken with Daniel Kinahan. It wasn't very clear where or when it had been taken, but nonetheless it was kind of put out there as this social media interaction with Billy Joe and all their training was becoming kind of like almost reality TV. So, that was clear that Kinahan was there somewhere in the background. And as I said, in around the end of 2017, we're told that Kinahan no longer has anything to do with MGM. The name is changing to MTK, and they try to whitewash that, the foundings, as his criminal reputation is becoming more and more toxic, Daniel Kinahan, because of what's happening back in Dublin and because of the kind of the giant, at that point, coming together of police forces around the world in an effort against the Kinahan
mafia.
Like
if you remember the as people started to get murdered again and again as part of the Hutch Kinahan feud, it went from being a local crime story to being an international crime story. I mean, there was articles in The Guardian, all through European papers. And at that point, Daniel Kinahan's name was being associated with these things in a very, towards the end of the article, sometimes you'd hear it mentioned or whatever. So that's why he stepped away from MGM. And that's why the name change ultimately came about.
To MTK.
But what you did start seeing then was, Daniel, there was public things about he'd stepped away. But then all of a sudden you'd see him popping up on social media with some of these fighters, or some of them would be thanking him. And then there would be things about him giving them advice.
Yes.
Do you
He
know
was
what I
a
mean?
great old advisor, wasn't he?
Great old advisor, but nothing, like he wasn't
But
working.
he wasn't working and he wasn't making any money.
No.
Interestingly, Ben Davison, who is one of the coaches linked to Fury, because of course when he comes into that MGM turning MTK fold, he's partnered up with the trainers Danny Vaughan, Ben Davison, and the boxers Thomas Stoker and Paddy Barnes, who are regularly sparring with him to try and help him come on. But all of this is this dream clash with Anthony Joshua. But Ben Davison, who is his trainer, would later say that Fury, when he was introduced to Daniel Kinahan in early 27, and he dates that, and he says he had a threat of legal cases hanging over him, financial worries, he was drinking tequila for breakfast, and he was in bad health. And I'm quoting Davison here. At that point, Tyson was questioning everything about himself, even his own existence, he said. To have somebody come along and say, "Don't worry, I believe in you, I've got your back," was a godsend to him. Daniel gave him the footings to start again, a positive outlook and a pathway back to the top. It was huge for Tyson.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it was, I mean, this is like, he obviously, because of the condition he was in, he obviously needed that kind of round the clock attention to get him back on track. And I think obviously some of his family have previously spoken about knowing Daniel Kinahan for 20 years. So that was obviously a factor in the whole issue. So he like, amazingly, he did start to lose. You could see it through the videos, the social media videos. All of a sudden, he started to lose weight. He started to look like he was moving well. He still doesn't look fully like the most defined of athletes, but he did start to pick up, but it was a very, very quite a rapid process. And all of a sudden then he was fighting fit.
Yeah, he was the Gypsy King again, wasn't he? And really, that was it wasn't just sort of a return to the ring that was being offered him and maybe his motivation. It was this sort of glittering future of unimaginable wealth. That was the promise, that was the carrot. And this glorious return to the ring where everybody would watch on. I think Tyson himself around the time starts talking about, how he wants to do this for his family, for his friends, to show that he could make the comeback. He obviously gains confidence in himself and a bit of a determination. He's still new to the fold when he's invited to Daniel Kinahan's much spoken about wedding at the Burj Al Arab in Dubai in the summer of 2017.
Yeah, so I mean, the wedding, which, if you remember, there was a lot of talk it was going ahead, but people weren't really sure what was going on. I remember trying to, get it into the paper, but it's become one of those moments that is another pivotal moment in the history of the Daniel Kinahan, not just on a personal level getting married, but also because it was being monitored, obviously by the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency of the US. People didn't know that the US had become interested in it, and yet what you had was some of probably the most prominent people in organised crime in Europe appearing for the wedding. You also had many of the most high-profile boxers in the world appearing, none of whom are involved in crime, but they were. So it was
That's again where you see that kind of mingling of the worlds, isn't it? That it's almost as if they're passing one another without.
Yeah, and I think some of them certainly had a regard for each other as well.
Yeah.
They both liked mixing with.
Yeah.
Some of the criminals like mixing with the celebrities, and some of the celebrities seem to like mixing with the criminals. So But Tyson Fury was there. I think he tweeted on the way and then took down a tweet, not with Daniel, but at the hotel. So
they were all warned not to put anything up, and I think he's always quick on social media. He was with his wife Paris, and I think he may have tried to congratulate Daniel, but was very quickly told to take it down, remove it. That obviously was, I'm sure that, there was no bad blood about it, but
No.
nonetheless, it was he was told to move it down. He's back in the ring, I think, by June 2018.
Yeah, he's back in the ring. He has a couple of, I suppose, a couple of fights that are to get him back on track. Maybe not, people that he would have been expected to beat back in the day, but he was still. I remember watching one of them, and somebody was saying he's not going to beat these guys, but he did. He looked. He didn't look as sharp as somebody who's been training throughout all that process. But what really happened is that he got a few fights under his belt, and
people started taking him seriously again.
People started taking him seriously, but he was also very quickly. He had a fight arranged with Deontay Wilder. Deontay Wilder, I think, was unbeaten at this stage. He was really the most dominant heavyweight in the world. Although Tyson had won a couple of fights, he didn't. They probably weren't of extremely high quality. Certainly in the very first one, it was very pedestrian looking, for obvious reasons, that from where the guy was coming back from. But then he seemed to very quickly have this fight with Deontay Wilder. And I remember reading in the run-up to it, a lot of people saying, look, he just doesn't have a hope, and that it's come too quickly. He should have had another few fights over a year. Like, really, I can't remember the exact odds, but the odds were, the betting was incredibly favourable to Deontay Wilder, maybe not the most, doesn't move as well as some boxers, but a ferocious puncher. And I think really most people expected Tyson Fury to be
beaten.
Yeah. And beaten easily, and maybe thought it was,
this kind of thing develops then around him, really, this underdog, this guy who's come back from the brink of everything and is winning. And like, you couldn't sort of help yourself but sort of be, I actually do quite like boxing. I know nothing about it.
I wouldn't say to be an expert either, but he has a great boxing brain, Tyson Fury, So, it was incredible, really. Like, you can't, whatever else you have to say, to come back from there and to go on to become the world champion, it is an incredible feat.
Now, at the same time, and around this time, Daniel Kinahan is named in the High Court in Dublin. He's named as the head of the Kinahan Organised Crime Group. As part of a cab case against the Burn Network, which is a kind of a franchise of the Kinahans. So, that causes a big furore on the front pages of the newspapers, maybe, while Tyson's sporting achievements are on the back. And on we go until the video message of 2020.
Hello there. I'm just after getting off the phone with Daniel Kinahan. He's just informed me that the biggest fight in British boxing history has just been agreed. Get up there, my boy! Big shout out, Dan. He got this done, literally over the line. 2-fight deal. Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua next year. Big thank you, Dan, for getting this deal over the line. All the best. God bless you all. See you soon. Peace out.
So that was a sensational moment, Niall.
That was a sensational moment. I think there was two things going on. The Regency had been a few years, 4 years previous. Certainly things have become quieter on the streets of Dublin. The success of MTK and Daniel Kinahan's, role as advising in boxing had increased. He'd become more and more public over that period of time. He started appearing with, for example, Bob Arum, the US promoter. He had gone quiet on social media, was reappearing with boxers. And I think
that's a confidence, though, you see, because the time period he's feeling that he's untouchable. He's in Dubai, he's in the Emirates, he's mixing with royals, his businesses are flying. As we're later told by the US sanctions, he's worth $1 billion. This guy is from the streets of Dublin is now worth $1 billion. The confidence he has that he's untouchable. The ego is getting bigger and bigger.
So I think, he probably could have, if you look back then, he could have probably stayed in the shadows and he would have been able to have that double life, I think, for a while more. But I think at that point he wanted to relaunch himself, and I think he wanted to. I mean, look, it's one of the cliches. They want to go become clean. They want to legitimize themselves, and I think at that point there was a fight being arranged, or a prospective fight being arranged, with Anthony Joshua against Tyson Fury, which would have been the pinnacle of certainly in British boxing. It would have been the biggest fight in the world, and I think Daniel probably wanted a name check.
Yeah.
For arranging it.
And I mean, there's no way, I've always said there's absolutely no way Tyson Fury did that without sanction from Kinahan to name him. There's absolutely no way anybody does anything without Kinahan sanctioning. And I think he wanted that. He gave that. And of course, that led to absolute ructions here in Ireland. Leo Varadkar stood up in the Dáil. We had politicians getting in touch with, their colleagues elsewhere in the UK. There was the Panorama documentary, which was the first time BBC properly handled the story, the Kinahan story, and their connections with boxing. Coming into 2021, Daniel Kinahan himself is really pushing onwards with this idea that he is a victim, that he is not who the later we'll hear from the US and our own police exactly who he is, but he's trying to describe himself as a victim really of the Irish state. He's created this conspiracy theory all around what happened to him, that he was, that there was a kind of a joint effort by media, politicians and police to have him killed. And by March 2022, I think Kinahan is at the ultimate of that feeling of untouchability when he sits down with James English.
And I think also he really had, maybe their role in the drugs business had changed. The Kinahan Organised Crime Group's role, they were, certainly if you remember back in 2016, I think they were micromanaging everything in Ireland. I mean, they were absolutely involved, but I think they'd become a more wholesaling role. And I think that gave him the confidence then to push himself as a legitimate businessman. You had fighter after fighter coming out with videos on social media about how great Daniel Kinahan was. I mean, we had one video on YouTube, Daniel Kinahan saved my life. One boxer had done a video. So I think he'd absolutely believed, and probably for reason, in that he was involved in negotiating with international broadcasting companies. I think he believed he could step away and into this new role as a legitimate businessman by March 2022. That's where he was. He was just going to make that one final push, and he was going to be there.
And Tyson Fury at the same time, of course, is very concentrated on his career and the penultimate fight of his career. The bout against Dillian White in front of 94,000 fans at Wembley Stadium, which was due to take place in April. Now, March, we have Kinahan top of his game, talking to James English. By April, for him, it's all over.
Yeah, it's all over. I mean, it was all over. It was all over in 24 hours, I think. Despite what had been written about him, remember, it's not just what was written about him. I mean, it's what people knew,
Yeah.
He'd managed to look like he could somehow push it all to the past. And remember, even just the week before, I think it was the week before, we had one of the most important figures in boxing, the WBC president, come over and meet Daniel Kinahan in Dubai, and then put out a most bizarre statement saying about how he had been the victim of a conspiracy, and he was such a lovely guy, and he was mistreated, and then within a week he had to take that back because the power of the American state came down in a sort of absolutely unequivocal way. He was put in the same bracket as Al Qaeda or some of the Russian oligarchs. He was put in that absolute top category of, what effectively are regarded as, and some of the Mexican cartels, enemies of the US state. And it was, I actually remember, and it's not too long ago, but watching it and thinking, they'll try and bounce out of this a bit more. It's going to be a blow, but he'll have the propaganda being pumped out by the fighters associated with him and all that. But it just didn't really happen. You had a couple of tweets in the couple of days after. And
by nobody significant.
And in fact,
certainly not by Tyson Fury.
No, certainly not. And what you had instead was people rapidly withdrawing. People that had been absolutely unequivocally loyal, who had propagandized on his behalf. Some of them people who knew it didn't even matter that convictions or not. These people knew people who were, would have known people who had been shot or would have had associations. I mean, everybody knew. But all of those people, they just stopped. Dramatically so, because anybody in the world of boxing knew, that you can't, that double life was over. And if they wanted to make a living out of boxing, they could not be coming out in support of Daniel Kinahan. Just as simple as that.
A very good old pal of mine who would have been a significant player in the underworld used to always say to me, it's all about the money.
Yeah.
There is no loyalty.
No.
Probably in life somewhat. I mean, that's a little bit grim now, but you'd like to think that the normal world exists, but it's all about the money. And when that money was threatened, it was really, and for boxing itself, I think it's disgraceful as a sport. It was only when the corporate was threatened that they stood up and stood back.
Absolutely.
And nobody still is condemned.
No, but it was all about the money, because they were, Daniel, he was funneling money into the world of boxing, and therefore he was okay. And when he then became a drag on them generating money, he was no longer okay. I mean, Daniel Kinahan, just to be clear, he was the head of an organised crime gang since sometime in the certainly, let's say, if you take it from the mid-2000s.
Early 2000s, yeah.
Yeah. So he didn't become the head of an organised crime gang on, was it March the 19th or whatever, in when the US government stood up. He didn't become that day just because the American government said it. He was that before and he's that after. And people knew it. I mean, the dogs in the street knew it. I know people don't always love that term, but they did.
Yeah. And kind of the first after the kind of the dust settled somewhat after those sanctions were announced, the first one to be targeted by the media questioning, of course, was Tyson, because he was facing the fight with Dillian Whyte.
Yeah, he was promoting it. I mean, he was promoting it almost every day in the run-up. Obviously...
And he was trying to ignore the elephant in the room, and just, some of the interviews he was doing, he was clearly saying, I'm not talking about this, but he was confronted.
He stormed out. He stormed out. I mean, he was probably unlucky in his timing in that, as part of these fights, there was a huge crowd obviously in Wembley, and that generates a lot of money. But really, the money to be made is pay-per-view, where for subscribers. I mean, that is where they make the big money. And in order to make that money, to get people interested, it has to be promoted by the fighters primarily. So those guys have to come out and sell it effectively, which Tyson Fury is brilliant at selling his fights, because he's such a extroverted character. And so, but he got stuck because every single interview somebody wanted to ask about it. And we had the bizarre thing just a few days, I think, after the sanctions were laid, that they had a press conference online, a video conference, and people were being told, you can't ask this, you can't ask that. But once you get before a TV camera, I suppose, if the question gets asked, what are you going to do? So they couldn't really stop it in the long term, but they were trying to stop questions being asked.
But anything he has said since is that he's nothing to do with Daniel Kinahan. And, he's totally and utterly
Yeah.
nothing got to do it. I mean, it's like almost it's sort of a Judas Iscariot move, isn't it? That he's denying the guy who, and we've gone through it, who he credited with his comeback, who he credited with taking him from the scrap heap and offering him this, fresh hope for a new life. And now nothing to see here, my friend.
No, and I mean, remember, of course, it wasn't as if it was all historical. I mean, they were posed on the rooftop in a Dubai gym. I mean, it was only a month earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't historical. But yeah, because, see, what we heard then was the sanctions, and there was, I think, 7 people named and sanctioned at that point. But then, a couple of weeks later, the assistant commissioner from the Garda did an interview, and he said, this 600. And, all of a sudden, like 600 is a lot of people.
A lot of people.
I mean, that is a lot of people.
It's the trainers, the coaches, whoever's working in the gyms.
Yeah, there's not 600 people in the organised crime gang. That's other people as well.
100%. 100%.
And straight away, when I heard that, I thought, does that include Tyson Fury? I mean, this is the world heavyweight champion.
Yeah.
Does that actually include him?
And as the time has gone on, it looks as if it didn't.
No.
Until Friday.
Though the signs were with Matthew Macklin. I mean, I think that was also a shock. I was thinking, it's people, money people or, accountants or whatever. But no, it was the Americans were having nobody in that had chosen to be with him.
So what does it ultimately, and finally, what does it ultimately mean for Tyson Fury?
Well, as I said,
he told us he was retired, by the way, but they all say that.
Well, I think he's already suggested now that he isn't retired. So always with boxing, like rock bands, British rock bands, they make it big in the UK, but they really want to break the US. And I think with boxers, it's something similar. Like there's obviously a big market in the UK. They can become very wealthy through that market, but really it's to go over to the States to break that pay-per-view, to sell a lot of those, to get a proceed of that. They get a share of those things, kind of like Conor McGregor has done, where he so that is what Tyson Fury and all of the boxers in the UK ultimately want to do, is to, he can fight in the UK, he can probably fight in the Middle East, but to go over to the US, that's where they make the big money. I mean, that absolutely phenomenal money. And in order to do that, they have to be over there. It's all very well saying he's fighting. Sure, he can just fight in Saudi Arabia. But like a lot of these fighters, even if they are fighting elsewhere, they go over to the US and they go and do press conferences. They do stunts. They go around the chat shows. They do all these things. And, they get... So that's all of that, that's just no longer available to him and presumably to others. So it's going to have a huge impact. It's interesting actually. Like they're banned there. We have no idea if they can even appeal that. Can they go to court? Can they?
How long does that last for?
Does it last?
Is that indefinite? Is that for the rest of their lives?
It's actually on their website, on the official sanctioning things, that they can be. Some of these can be removed or changed. Doesn't say exactly how, but the days of seeing boxers coming out and saying, poor old Daniel is a great guy and I don't know anything about that, but he's a wonderful advisor. I mean, they are all over. And where does that leave him? I mean, the dream of exiting the world of organised crime to become a legitimate businessman with a few questions and maybe a colourful past, that dream was still alive when he sat down. And James English is obviously one of the most successful podcasters in the UK. He, I think that's probably in the month before the sanctions, he had sat down. I'd say the idea, that interview was due out actually on Paddy's Day, but didn't come out for who knows exactly why. But I think that was the point at which he really believed, I'm going to get there. Look, there'll always be a couple of questions about me, but I'm going to be able to really put that in the past.
One more stepping stone.
And in fact,
but in he went to the drink.
He went into the currents and has been swept off. And there is no coming back.
And no doubt tainted too is that amazing comeback we spoke of Tyson Fury, because while obviously his story continues, this will be a very dark chapter being.
Yeah, look, I mean, this is the other reality for him, is that he will do interviews, and and he has a lot to say, and much of it is of great worth. But that question will always be asked of him. I mean, that's just the way it is. And you had another boxer there just yesterday, Josh Taylor, another really talented boxer, who again has to answer the Daniel Kinahan question and say have no more dealings with him and all of that, after praising him to the hilt previously. So those guys that's always going to be there at them,
You can't change history. Niall Donald, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicola.
You've been listening to Crime World, a podcast from SundayWorld.com, produced by Ian Mullaney and edited by me, Nicola Tallant. If you like the podcast and love true crime, why not download the SundayWorld.com app for lots more stories from Ireland and across the globe.